Susan. So, well, let me first say that it's nice to be back with this group, even if it's only virtually. I used to help Chayton and Wendy direct the Big Data Interagency Work Group, but it's been a few years, and so it's a pleasure to be able to talk with you guys again. So I've been at the National Cancer Institute for 9 months, which makes me qualified to talk about anything related to cancer research, of course. But I had a pretty long history in biomedical data science, and so this is just sort of a new activity and engagement for me, which is both challenging and fun. And I'm in the Center for Biomedical Informatics and Information Technology at NCI, which technically resides in the Office of Director. And we try to do both all of the IT, from help desk on up to bioinformatics for intramural researchers at NCI, as well as all of the data science related activities for extramural work at NCI. And let me just say, if you have questions as I go along, feel free to ask, and hopefully we'll have some time for discussion at the end. So I'm going to try to give you a little background about what's led to the creation of a Cancer Research Data Commons. Most of that resides in what's called a cancer data ecosystem. And then I'll tell you where we are in terms of planning and implementation of that data commons. I'll say a bit about some activities that will hopefully keep us more integrated and interoperable. And I'll end by talking a bit about what we're doing with collaboration and coordination. So the National Cancer Data Ecosystem really was initiated with what's called the Beau Cancer Moonshot in 2016, which has 3 overarching goals. One is to accelerate the pace of progress in cancer research, prevention, and care. 2 is to foster cooperation across different sectors, from academia to government to industry. And 3, most importantly for this talk, is to enhance data sharing. So there was the formation of a blue ribbon panel, which 9 months later issued a set of 10 recommendations, which are listed there. The full report, which is actually pretty interesting, is at that bottom URL, cancer.gov/BRP. And again, I will focus only on the one that appears in red there, which is the National Cancer Data Ecosystem. But all of the other elements of those recommendations are in the process of being implemented as well, from immunotherapy to oncoproteins to biospecimens to a human tumor atlas. So really most of that is being carried out through extramural grants and content. The National Cancer Data Ecosystem has an overarching goal of enabling all participants, which is not restricted to researchers. It includes patients and providers, to be able to contribute, access, analyze different data sets. So the recommendations we're trying to create that type of ecosystem include making better use of cloud computing platforms, to develop the underlying infrastructure and portals, to create the services that can link different types of data. Those are only some examples: clinical, imaging, genomics. To either make use of or to develop the standards and tools that are needed to make data interoperable, and to address that sort of elephant in the room of sustainability and governance. So it's important to note that that ecosystem is much bigger than NCI, and that the Cancer Research Data Commons is really just one piece of that larger data ecosystem. There's a lot on this slide, but basically it is intended to represent what I just said, that that cancer data ecosystem is much more than NCI alone. The core of this slide, the center of the slide, those 4 colored circles, are taken from that blue ribbon panel report that I referred to before. So I will just basically try to walk you through a little bit of this. If you start at the top, that top circle consists of curated knowledge bases and data repositories. And if you go around that core in a clockwise direction, they're essentially decision support tools and services for clinicians on the right-hand circle, support tools and services for patients at the bottom, tools and services for researchers on the left. So those are just intended to represent the three types of contributors and users of the cancer data ecosystem and all of the services and tools that enable them to make use of it. And then surrounding those four circles are really just some examples, it's not all inclusive, of some of the other programs that contribute to a cancer data ecosystem. So the American Society for Cancer Research, for example, supports what's called GENIE, which is a genomics evidence neoplasia information exchange that contains both genomics as well as clinical data. Orion, Oncology Research Information Exchange Network, is composed of a group of cancer centers that try to match patients to targeted treatments. ASCO, which is the American Society for Clinical Oncology, has a database called CancerLink, which is very useful for clinical care providers. SEER is an NCI program, Surveillance, Epidemiology, and Results, that contains a lot of registry information on a state level. And so if you went on around, there are just a number of different activities, all of which work together and with which NCI works to try to create this cancer data ecosystem. And I might just point out that there is a NCI Informatics Technology for Cancer Research activity, which is a grant program that mostly supports software development for analytics. There are also a set of what we refer to as cloud resources, which are shown in the upper left here, and I will say more about those. Those are at Seven Bridges Genomics, at Broad, and at the Institute for Systems Biology. And NCI has similarly supported a genomic data commons, about which I will also say a bit more. So those are sort of the two underpinnings for establishing a cancer research data commons. And again, that's just one more element within this constellation of an ecosystem. Okay, so let me move along to what we're trying to do to establish a cancer research data commons. So the basic idea of data commons, I'm sure everybody's already pretty familiar with this, is to try to co-locate the data, storage, and compute with all the services, the tools, the applications for sharing and analyzing data. And so the diagram on the right depicts what we have in mind for a cancer research data commons. I will try to step you through all of the components of this. But basically what we're thinking of is a set of what we call domain-specific nodes within a cloud environment. So our initial foci are proteomic, genomic, and imaging nodes, but in the future there may well be others, such as immuno-oncology, clinical biomarkers, et cetera. So the commons also contains all the resources needed for searching, analyzing, visualizing, interoperating across those different data types. And we are constructing what we call a data commons framework, which is intended to provide a set of core operating principles as well as components that can be deployed across all of those data nodes. So that's just sort of a brief touch upon all elements within the data commons, and again, I will try to delve into each of those a bit more. The goals of the NCI Cancer Research Data Commons are pretty straightforward, I think. They're to enable the cancer research community to share different data types across different programs and different institutions, and to provide easier access to those data regardless of where they may be localized, to provide mechanisms for tool discovery, access, and usage, to enable NCI data coordinating centers to sustain and to share their data publicly when they are ready to do so, and to develop that set of reusable components, which we refer to as the Data Commons Framework, not only for the purpose of this Cancer Research Data Commons, but to enable the community to use that to build other data commons. These are just, again, some examples of the types of data sources which may contribute to the Cancer Research Data Commons. TCGA is the Cancer Genome Atlas, which contains genomic data from about 33 types of cancer and has about 2.5 petabytes of data at this point. Target is a similar set of data focused on childhood cancers. There are also genomic data from foundations such as Foundation Medicine or the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. There is a large set of data from the Clinical Proteomic Tumor Analysis Consortium, which is about a 7-year-old program supported by NCI. Similarly, the Cancer Imaging Archive contains a large set of both radiology as well as pathology data. Eventually, but I would say we're not here yet. But there will be the option for cancer centers as well as individual labs to contribute data to the data commons. And NCI is engaged in a number of collaborative programs such as Apollo, which is with DoD and the VA, or the International Cancer Proteogenome Consortium, both of which contribute proteomic as well as genomic data. So again, those are just examples. That's not an all-inclusive list, but the point of that really is just to convey the idea that there's a large amount of already existing data, which the Cancer Research Data Commons can try to make more available and more interoperable for cancer researchers. Okay, so I mentioned this Data Commons Framework. And often that's just sort of confusing jargon to people because some of it is, sort of intangible and it's not something you can easily put your finger on, for example. But basically it's intended to develop a set of core operating principles and provide some reusable modular components that can be utilized across the data commons. So those components are listed here in the bottom half of that slide. So a more common approach to authentication and authorization is meant to try to minimize the effort for users to switch among cloud providers, the effort for users to switch among cloud resources so that their work can become more seamless. And similarly, we are trying to agree upon some common or minimal metadata and data models that will enhance interoperability and analysis across diverse data sets. And we're also designing the access services, the indexing and search, the portals, pipelines, and workspaces that can be flexible and assembled into different data environments. So all of that is will be used within this Cancer Research Data Commons to set up different data commons nodes. And again, as I mentioned, the community at large can leverage or make use of that to build other data commons. So this, so some of this as a framework has already been implemented by a number of different data commons, and they formed what they refer to as a Commons Alliance. Just some of the members of which are listed on the left hand of this slide. So those include the NCI Genomic Data Commons and this NCI Cancer Research Data Commons. Most of that work is carried out at the University of Chicago. The NIH All of Us program and the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative Human Cell Atlas. And so the diagram on the right depicts the basic architecture of what they refer to as a data biosphere. And if you start at the bottom, that basically consists of a number of cloud providers and data assets. So those are really just the storage and the access control for data. On top of that resides a set of framework services which control access to data and expose the data via standardized APIs. And then there's a set of indexing and search capabilities to make it easier for researchers to find the data of workspaces, which are sort of like analytical sandboxes, of analytical engines, which allow users to deploy workflows and repositories for sharing those workflows. And then there can also be more specialized portals and interfaces to support other use cases.
Alan, question.
Yes.
This is Jason here. The cloud 1, 2, 3, 4 things that you have there, are they the actual sort of big public cloud providers, or
yes.
How are those defined, and are there some notions of, how do you certify somebody to be a cloud provider?
Okay, so the next slide lists some of those cloud providers on the left-hand column, and I'm sure you're familiar with those.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, there are a number of criteria that the cloud providers have to meet in order to store biomedical research data. Some of this is, so most of the imaging data, for example, is open and public data. Much of the genomic data is what's called controlled access. So there have to be a number of FISMA compliant regulations, for example, that are met in order for those cloud providers to store that type of controlled access data. Does that help?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
It's a pretty, it's a lot of complicated legal interaction.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So this is really just another depiction of what I've already shown you. So really, as you can see, the basic storage and the services for importing, cleaning, curating the data exist there on the left-hand side. And so those are all of the services that enable data submission. The framework services are in this, what is referred to as narrow middle architecture. And those consist, as I mentioned, of authorization and authentication, some approaches to metadata and data models, and likewise some common approaches to workflows, containers, and workspaces. So those are really just intended to be shared components that enable any type of data commons to get up and running. And then on the right-hand column is where the analysis, the integration can take place. So again, all of those services on both where it says data in and under where it says science out can be more specialized and developed for any purpose that a researcher or a group wishes. So NCI is actually pretty lucky to have a nice solid foundation to begin to create the Cancer Research Data Commons. That foundation consists of two key elements. One is the NCI Genomic Data Commons, which has existed at the University of Chicago for about 4 years now. And so that does house genomic and clinical data from a number of cancer research programs, which are shown in this left-hand column. It contains and is harmonized over 8 petabytes of data from more than 40 projects and makes those data more widely available. And so the middle column really just describes how the Genomic Data Commons functions. So it supports receipt, quality control, integration, storage, and redistribution of standardized genomic data sets. And it harmonizes the raw sequence data to generate derived genomic data. And so by carrying out that type of work, the GDC helps to support the expansion of what we refer to as precision medicine into cancer research. The other, I would say, groundwork upon which a cancer research data commons is being built is what we refer to as cloud resources. These are likewise about 4 years old now, and they were initiated to try to move away from that model where everybody had to download very large data sets and carry out individual analyses upon those. So the idea was to try to broaden the access to genomic and related data to create a more cost-effective method to provide scalable compute. So those cloud resources provide access to large genomic data sets without any need to download those. The ability for researchers to bring their own tools and their own data to work with, and the workspaces to both share and save and analyze their data and the results thereof. And they do all that while meeting very strict federal security guidelines. And those cloud resources, as I mentioned a bit earlier in the upper right, reside at Seven Bridges Genomics, at the Broad and the Institute for Systems Biology. So our vision for a cancer research data commons is a virtual, expandable infrastructure that supports collaboration among researchers, clinicians, patients, computational scientists, and tool developers. And it houses these cloud-based nodes for multiple data types, which initially include genomic, imaging, and proteomics. And in the future, there may be other types as well. So the genomics data node is built upon the foundation of the GDC, which provides a means of data submission, user interfaces, and visualization tools. What we would refer to as is genomics, which is really more raw genomic data that is yet to be harmonized. And so that is similar in principle to what is called the sequence read archive within dbGaP, which is a large NIH database of genotypes and phenotypes. And the cloud resources provide more of the search, compute, and analytical resources, as well as a way for researchers to use their own data and tools. And that data commons framework that I've mentioned provides secure access, an approach to metadata validation, user workspaces, shared data models, and dictionaries to facilitate interoperability, as well as a tool repository such as DocStore to allow users to share new algorithms and pipelines. The proteomics data node incorporates data from CPTAC and other sources. Similarly, the imaging data node will work with the cancer imaging archive. And then lastly, just in terms of where are we now, the genomics data commons and the cloud resources are operational. The framework will actually be launched next week at ISMB, International Society for Computational Biology meeting in Chicago. As is genomics and the proteomics data commons are in what I would call a beta mode, so we expect those to be functional in the coming year. And the imaging data commons is about to be initiated by issuance of an RFP, request for proposals. The other elements there are still in the planning stage. So let me say a bit about a couple of activities that are designed to enhance interoperability. So one of those is what we refer to as the cancer data aggregator. So obviously just, collecting, storing all the genomics, proteomics, imaging data doesn't really get you where you want to be. You've basically just created more silos. So the aggregator is intended to be a service to connect disparate data so that there can be more of an integrative activity. So it will allow users to connect the data that are distributed across those domain-specific nodes, making use of a structured data model and appropriate metadata for each of those nodes so that the data can be searched, retrieved, analyzed by multiple means, for example, by patient or sample or study or disease. Simultaneously, we are working on what we refer to as an encrypted unique patient identifier. So there's obviously a need to be able to connect patient-level data across multiple sources, multiple data types, multiple research studies, and to do that over time. So just some of the challenges associated with that obviously include protecting the patient confidentiality and the personally identifiable information. And so our approach to that is to try to work on what we refer to as an encrypted hash token, which allows linkage of different types of data without release of that personally identifiable information. So lastly, let me just touch upon a bit of what we're trying to do with all of our partners. So we have a number of activities related to cancer centers. One of those is to provide some additional support for them to work on GENIE, which I mentioned is an effort to try to develop targeted therapies for cancer patients, to also work with the Genomic Alliance for Global Health in terms of implementing standards across their data commons. We're also working with that array of Moonshot programs that I mentioned up front. That includes providing some assistance for the U24, just NIH jargon for a cooperative agreement. So, for example, that includes data coordinating centers for programs such as the Human Tumor Atlas and the immuno-oncology activity. So we're trying to get in on the ground level. So these programs do not even exist at this point. They are supposed to start this fall. But we're trying to ensure that as they are launched, they are coordinated with the Cancer Research Data Commons. And then we work, I would say, pretty intensively on trying to integrate with other NIH institutes with the overarching NIH Data Commons Pilot Phase Consortium, with the NIH All of Us program, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health. We've also established an NCI Office of Data Sharing, which is intended to help with intra and extramural NCI investigators. I'll say a bit more about that. And we are carrying out a number of workshops and issuing a number of requests for information to try to ensure that we collect appropriate feedback from the larger research community. So last month, for example, we held a day-and-a-half workshop on semantics infrastructure for the Cancer Research Data Commons. There were 80 people at that workshop. And I would say, honestly, that this is just foundational to the establishment of any data commons. But often people overlook this simply because they think it's too hard and too complex to try to deal with. But without the appropriate semantic infrastructure and underpinning, a lot of those services that I referred to, including the framework and the cancer data aggregator, will just not operate efficiently, and it will really not be possible to provide the effective operation of a cancer research data commons so that users can integrate across different data types. We issued an imaging RFI, for example. You will probably see one shortly for a cancer data aggregator. And we've put into place a governance process for the Cancer Research Data Commons, which includes a scientific and technical advisory board and a steering committee. So this is just a little bit of information about the Office of Data Sharing, which is pretty new within NCI. This is what it's intended to do, which I consider to be an ambitious list of goals, to try to coordinate the interpretation and implementation of data sharing policies for NCI, to provide workflow management for data and metadata submissions, to be an advocate for the balance of open access, open source, and data sharing, to carry out outreach and education on NCI data sharing policies and processes. This is an important ingredient, I think, to put into place the right set of metrics to assess the effectiveness of our data sharing policies, and to coordinate with other parts of NIH and the research community. So that Office of Data Sharing has really just been put into place through last month. It has an N of 2 in terms of office staff at this point, but it's intended to grow over the coming year to about 10. And it will be working this summer. It's already started with the divisions, offices, and centers within NCI to develop a plan to centralize and coordinate data sharing activities. More of that implementation will start this fall, and then engagement with the extramural community and the rest of NIH should start early next year. So let me end by just providing you, again, just a small subset of acknowledgments. So just the principal investigators that are helping to establish the Cancer Research Data Commons are listed there at the top left. They each have a large team of people. The rest of that slide consists of people within NCI. Again, there are many more who make major contributions to establishing a Cancer Research Data Commons. That's just my email, and so you can get a hold of me by that means, and I'm glad to try to